Before I start my presentation, I would like to ask you all a question. Can you imagine living in a world devoid of humanity and independent thinking? I suppose all of you would dismiss this frightening thought in a heartbeat. However, this is not the case for the protagonist in the novel I'm going to share today. The book is 1984, which was written by George Orwell in 1948. And before I start, I would like to divide my presentation into 3 parts: the plot, the pros and cons, and its inspiration for me. Starting with the plot, it is set in 1984 in a totalitarian state called Oceania, in which the government controls the thoughts of its population and brings them into unthinking loyalty towards the leader, the Big Brother. However, the main protagonist, Winston, has an intense longing for truth and independence, and as a result, he resents the government's suppressive control and ultimately rebels against it. Unfortunately, his little rebellion does not last long, and he is eventually arrested for re-education, which serves to root out his virtues. Now, being more familiarized with the plot, let's move on to the pros and cons of its plot. Starting with the good points. First, Winston's heroic pursuit of preserving his virtues is being magnified by the dire consequences the book depicts. For example, 1984 has put a huge effort on emphasizing that was devoted to prevent his rebellious acts from being discovered, as he will only lead to a painful death. For me, I believe it adds suspense and weight to all his actions, as they are done under high stakes. Furthermore, it is awe-inspiring for me to know that even though Winston has already weighed his pursuit of preserving these aspirations against preserving his own life, he still chooses the riskier option of pursuing these virtues for mankind, and therefore as seen as he willing to sacrifice himself to rebel. The second good point is that 1984 is not cliché written in terms of plot. In the end, Winston's attempt to preserve his virtues is proven futile, as during his re-education, he willingly betrays his love to Julia in the hope of ending his suffering. For example, he shouted, "Do it to Julia, I don't care about her," in face of torture. To me, the concept of Winston's role for self-preservation overcoming his virtues, though not expected, is not entirely inconceivable. And to my dismay, this demonstrates that our virtues are not invincible, and I will elaborate further in the message part later. Now, every rose may have its thorns, and 1984 is no exception. Moving on, I believe the ending can be misinterpreted in a pessimistic way, which discourages action. George Orwell wrote 1984 with a will to warn people about the dire consequences if totalitarianism is left unchallenged. And to achieve this, people have to be motivated to take action. Unfortunately, the dystopian way the book depicts the situation makes me believe that Winston, who still carries humanity and independence in himself, is the last flicker of hope left in his world, and will be gone forever after his death. And as a result, and this gave me the wrong feeling that a totalitarian government is unshakable and nothing can make a difference. And therefore, instead of prompt action that tries to salvage humanity in such a situation, isn't it giving us the wrong feeling that we should give up, as all our efforts will end in vain eventually? Now, moving on to the message, you may ask, how does 1984 relate to us? Personally, I believe our society resembles a totalitarian government, as both of them seek to bend individuals according to the universal beliefs endorsed by it. And this brings us to the third theme, which is how we should respond when our humanity is being challenged by prevailing norms in society. And to define humanity, it comprises our aspirations and individuality, and let's dive into it. First and foremost, our aspirations should not be impeded by universal norms. In real life, many universal beliefs are viewed as unwritten rules in society, and therefore society expects young people to follow suit. For example, when it comes to career planning, a recent study conducted by the University of Hong Kong on teens' aspirations has found that a large proportion of parents, around 65% of them, judge their children for not conforming to norms of prioritizing salary over interest. And this is where the problem begins. In 1984, despite Winston knowing his aspiration of pursuing virtues is the morally right thing to do, he still chooses to renounce it eventually to end his suffering. And similarly, for young people facing a never-ending bombardment of judgment, despite knowing what they aspire is beneficial to their development, many of them still resort to conforming to these norms to end their suffering. And this demonstrates that blindly enforcing these universal norms will have a distorting effect on individuals, and therefore it gets me thinking. Living under a totalitarian government, perhaps there's no other option for Winston but to submit. But we have no obligation to make our world a totalitarian one. And therefore, why can't we be more open-minded to our aspirations by dropping our deep-seated beliefs? And the consequence of not doing so is dire. In terms of individuals, both Winston and young people appear to simply renounce something that's precious to them. But on a deeper level, this actually implies that they're willing to give up everything, including their morals, aspirations, values, when confronting challenges and adversities. But what if the aspirations concern morality, like aspirations for building a better world, aspirations for advocating sustainability and equality? These aspirations, like others, do lead to a bumpy road filled with challenges and by universal norms. However, should we fail to uphold these aspirations, then progress in these areas will be stunted. And in terms of society, many aspirations come into existence to address the issues associated with our society. For example, Winston's aspiration of restoring humanity tries to address the issue of a lack of human warmth in his world. And similarly, young people's aspiration of working as a freelancer aims at addressing the issue of a lack of human warmth in his world. And therefore, if these aspirations are barred from execution simply because they violate some adequate norms, then society as a whole will bear the loss of these improvements that it desperately needs. And therefore, it does not take much to see that we cannot afford to conform to these beliefs at the expense of our own aspirations. And another equally important theme is our individuality. Only through appreciating the uniqueness and difference of individuals can we build an inclusive society. But 1984 goes in the opposite direction. The totalitarian government standardized many aspects of its party members. For example, they are forced to wear the same uniform, they are forced to have the same daily routine, and they are forced to take up the same ideologies. And as a result, they are being made indistinguishable, and thus uprooting their individuality. And to my horror, I have realized that our younger generation is also moving in this direction, and the aftermath can be just as catastrophic. In Hong Kong, under the influence of celebrities and advertisements, many teens perceive the qualities possessed by their idols as standards that define perfection in one area. Unfortunately, this craze has slowly evolved in an obsession with making peers also conform to these beliefs as standards. For me, facing increasingly pressure, I was also once tempted to shape myself according to these standards. 1984 warns us the consequences of losing our individuality is dire. As in the book, no citizen is allowed to be special, they naturally feel insignificant and doubt their purpose. And similarly in real life, as only a handful of individuals can be considered successful according to these standards. In terms of individuals being judged inferior and excluded by these standards takes a toll on their self-esteem, and seeking to redeem themselves, many teens become willing to sacrifice their individuality and morph themselves according to these standards. For example, taking plastic surgery to make over their appearance. And doesn't this goes against our human nature of pursuing freedom in developing and building our identity and individuality? And in terms of society as a whole will become increasingly homogeneous as it disallows any deviations from the standards it endorsed. And as in the long run, the vibrant society will be lost forever as it built on the foundation of our individuality. And therefore, it is unwise to sacrifice our individuality for the sake of conforming to these standards. But if we think deeper, why do we all conform to these universal beliefs in the first place? I believe the root of this problem can be attributed to a lack of critical thinking in daily life. We simply follow what we perceive without thinking. And therefore, this brings us to the second theme, which is the importance of critical thinking. I believe critical thinking is crucial in safeguarding our interests, as only taking information passively will present an opportunity for others to manipulate our interpretation by controlling what facts are being presented to us. 1984 takes this to the extreme. Whenever the totalitarian government fails to deliver its promise, it destroys all evidence of its past failures and its empty promises, and as a result, only receiving positive information, the population is being misled into believing the government is culpable. Perhaps, and this demonstrates how easily our interpretation can be manipulated. Perhaps you may question the necessity of spending the extra effort and validating the information we receive, and 1984 tells us it's worthwhile to do so. As the development in Winston's world grinds to a halt, as the government is no longer obliged to fulfill any promise, and ultimately it's the citizens' interest that is being sacrificed. And therefore, in real life, if we simply believe whatever others tells us, it equals to putting our own interests at others' disposal. Therefore, we cannot take it for granted that all the information we receive is unbiased and everything will turn out fine for us. Take the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war as an example. All news reports on the casualty and the morality as being censored on the Russian state media, but only broadcasting victories after victories. And as a result, the poor Russians are being misled into believing they should continue to support the invasion. And to us, with critical thinking, we will be in a better position to sniff out the lies and be less susceptible to the deceivers. For example, ask yourself, is it too good to be true? And in short, it is imperative that we remain critical of all the information we receive, as in the long run, it will be us who suffer if we all get manipulated for others' gain. And to summarize, I believe our critical thinking safeguards our humanity, and our humanity drives our desire to protect our interests through critical thinking, and therefore they mutually complement each other. And to conclude, I would like to ask you all to recall the question asked at the start. The reality is that if we don't take any action, this unsettling imagination of living in Winston's world will become a harsh reality. And I highly recommend reading 1984 as it serves as a much needed wake-up call. I believe the attack on our virtues is obvious to us when we are forced to renounce them under bodily torture, but many of us are indifferent and ignorant to the daily choices that will ultimately cost ourselves our virtues. Perhaps you may think that we can afford to lose bits for our temporary pleasure and convenience, but one day this irreversible loss will get out of control, and we will pay the price wisdom paid to preserve the last bits of it. And therefore, our future hinges on actions taken today. So let's stay vigilant and protect this precious thing our protagonist Winston wasn't able to behold before it's too late. And before I end my presentation, I would like to invite questions from the audience. Thank you.